who challenge and, if necessary, destroy media narratives. I'm George Samueli. With me today, of course, is co-founder of the Gaggle, Peter Lavelle. And it is time for our last live stream of 2024. So it's a big day, maybe not such a big day, but nonetheless, it's our last live stream. And then next Monday, it'll be the first live stream of 2025. So how are you, Peter, on the last but one day of 2024?
Well, for those that don't know, in Russia, New Year's it's the day. I mean, if you're an American, it means it's the 4th of July, it's Thanksgiving and Christmas all rolled into one. It's a big, big deal, but not for me. Okay, I just never gotten interested in it. It's a lot of it's all the usual anxieties and stresses you have with holidays. You got to do things, got to be always nice to people, even if you don't like them, and you got to go shopping, and there's a lot of people around. It's the usual thing.
No, that's right. It's very interesting because I hadn't really realized that New Year's is such a big deal for Russians.
It's because of the Bolsheviks.
A lot of other places, you have a small party or you don't bother having a party. But for Russians, it is actually a really big deal. It's a big event, at least as big as Christmas.
It's much bigger than Christmas. Much, much bigger. But that's not to say that things aren't changing. If you're Orthodox, then the Christmas is in early January. It's not at the end of December. So you go from New Year's to Christmas, which, for people brought up in the Western world, that's inside out and backwards, right? So it's something that's changing here. I mean, there's more overt expressions of religiosity every year that passes for me living here. But New Year's is the big one.
It's the big one, yes.
And I have my dogs, and I spend New Year's at home because they like fireworks. They call it the salute, and
dogs get nervous.
The dogs get very, very nervous. So I do everything during the day, nice meals, meeting people, and all that. But there's nothing that can get me to go out and drink at night. I don't drink at night, and I don't go out at night. So it's completely alien to me. But I'll be home.
The one thing I do like about these the Russian New Year's, I mean, they have these zakuski, which are kind of like snacks, but they're really tasty. So they have all these delicious Russian salads like olivier, vinaigrette, herring. So it's really nice. I mean, it's not just some cheese and crackers. I mean, those are really hearty snacks.
There is an upscale supermarket chain called Azbuka of Kusa, which roughly translates to tasty bounty. It doesn't roll off the tongue in English like it does in Russian. In Russian, and this is top drawer stuff. Okay, it's a mystery to me how they've been able to avoid all of the sanctions, because you go in there and it's the best of the best dairy and pastries from Belgium, from Denmark, from Germany, Austria. I mean, you name it, they've got it with the appropriate price. Okay, the vast majority of Russians know of the place, but the vast majority don't shop there for very good reason. And this was okay. We went in. I'll tell you how crowded it was. We went in there. There was no shopping cart. You had to look for one. Because so people leave it abandoned after they go, and there's these elderly pensioners that collect the baskets and put them at the entrances. I mean, there were so many people that we had to go scurry in and find one. Okay, which when we go there, usually there's like 40, just packed in there. Today, no, and it was very festive. The displays and what people are demanding is like a bottle of maple syrup for $70. Well, isn't that interesting? Okay, there's probably no one ever buys it, but it's on
Right.
display.
Right.
It's it again, it having an amazing New Year's table is something that a lot of Russians take pride in. Okay, a
Yes.
lot of pride. They want a really beautiful, nice
Right.
spread. It's
But
very
those are
important.
things also not that hard to prepare. I mean, if you're willing to prepare them, you can make salads and everything. So
Sure.
you don't have to go buy the salad.
No, yeah, everyone can afford to have a New Year's. Okay,
Right.
that's for sure. Okay,
Right.
and
Right.
George named off some of the salads. I mean, Russian cuisine is extremely well known for its amazing color arrays. Okay, which for most Western-minded or people brought up in the West is like pink salad. Now that's something. That's interesting looking. Okay,
Right.
they use a lot of gelatins and stuff like that. I mean, that's not for me at all. So,
Right.
but what I'm
Right.
just trying to convey is it's the biggest day of the year, and people take it very, very seriously. It's not just for family; it's extended. It's for friends. Of course, drinking is involved, but in the quarter century that I've lived here, the drinking as a mass social habit, it's really decreased a lot, a
Right.
whole lot.
Right.
Um,
Sure.
and then one of the reasons too is that people like to drive. And you
Yes.
get stopped for drunk driving, you lose your license.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Boom.
Yeah.
There
Yeah.
there's
Yeah.
no negotiate. See, that's one of the reasons why I like living here, is that you're drinking and driving. No license, bye.
Right.
That's it.
Right.
You're done. You're done. They just they don't there's no tolerance for it. So, young people would rather have that driver's license
Right.
than a drink in their hand,
Right.
okay?
But I think
And
that's true in many places. I mean, I think that anyone who goes anywhere with a car knows, hey, the price of driving means this social event I've come to, I'm not going to drink because it's just too risky. Because not only they can take your license away, they can prosecute you, and they do. So that's the effect that it has. But
and plus, George, just the variety of drinks now people have. Okay, you have all kinds of imported beer, you have spirits, liqueurs, all kinds of things. I mean, so there's much more of a choice. You just don't go to the hard stuff right away. As a matter of fact, the younger crowds is hardly ever. I mean, and people much younger than myself, let's get a bottle of vodka. It just never happens. Okay,
right,
you still see elderly people, and sometimes you see it in the shopping centers in the food court where you have a bunch of old, maybe army veterans or something like that, and they got a table on the side and they pull out a bottle and then security, because there's a lot of security in those places. And they go up to the guy and say, "Come on, guys, at least put it in a bag." They're not going to
right,
go after them. Younger people, yeah, they'll kick you out. They'll grab you by the collar and just get out. But the elderly just be discreet about it. Just be discreet, okay? But it
right,
very rarely happens these days.
right,
So
right.
the weather is very nice. It's hovering around 0, so it's nice to be outside. We haven't had snow cover for about 5 days now, so the streets are all clean. So it'll
But I
be
guess the cold weather is going to come in January. I mean,
yeah.
global warming or no global warming, you're still going to get the cold Moscow
Well,
winter.
and plus we've had more than our fair share of snowfall.
Right.
And we've had some pretty good blanketing of the city. And then George is right. And then it comes, you could say, the first snow in October. No, it's really January, February, March. That's winter.
Yeah, that's yeah. Anyway, the big news, obviously, of the day, and it broke yesterday evening, was the passing of President Jimmy Carter. And I mean, not exactly unexpected. He was 100 years old. The last time we saw him, which was on his 100th birthday, he really seemed out of it. I mean, he was quite embarrassing the fact that the family brought him out to mark his 100th birthday, because he kind of just really passed out during the commemoration. But anyway, he's gone, and of course now people are remembering and offering assessments of Jimmy Carter. Now, I think one would have to say that he was obviously a decent man in many ways, not as good as people say he was, or we can get into that why I don't think he was as good as people say he was, but I don't think he was a terribly effective president, and I think that's the problem that when he arrived in office January the 20th, 1977, it was not a bad time for America. No wars. America had managed to extricate itself from Vietnam. Relations with the Soviet Union were pretty decent. It was still détente prevailed. The economy, had a lot of problems, but not nothing catastrophic. It didn't come in the middle of a depression or anything. And then he left, and it was in a completely, everything was in a terribly parlous state, and he was rejected overwhelmingly. For an incumbent president, not just to lose, but to be rejected by such a huge margin, you have to say he failed. Whatever his decency and whatever his virtues, you'd have to say this was a failed presidency.
Well, I mean, when it comes to political, when you're reviewing a politician's past, and the first thing that you say, he was a nice guy,
right?
It was a problematic career. Right. It was a problematic time. Jimmy Carter, that was the first presidential campaign that I can say that I was fully aware. Okay, I mean, I knew who was president when I was 6. Okay. Did I care? Did I understand what the presidency was, et cetera, et cetera? But 1976 was kind of my coming of age in politics, because I remember staying up very late at night watching the primaries. So I watched every single primary, Super Tuesday and all that kind of thing. And there was a genuine groundswell for Jimmy Carter. It was real. It very much was real. And in a way, he is kind of reminiscent in just one small way to Donald Trump, because Jimmy Carter was not the Democratic Party's choice. Okay, far from it. Okay, and George and I have talked about the evolution of the primary system, and Jimmy Carter was one of the ones that got through. He got through. Okay, because he wasn't favored. He was considered a one-off. He was he's just a protest. And of course, George and I remember he's just a peanut farmer. Well, he had a PhD in physics. Okay. I mean,
right. And he was actually quite a successful peanut farmer. He wasn't just
a very successful
hand to mouth kind of, I wonder if I'm going to make the harvest this year. No, he was a very successful peanut farmer.
Well, he was in agro business. We don't, but I mean, Naval Academy, a nuclear physicist, I mean, he was good enough for in politics of Georgia to move himself up. So, I mean, this kind of, completely obscure. Yeah, he didn't have name recognition, but I mean, he was an accomplished person by any standard. Now, the problem is that he wasn't a creature of the Democratic Party. And I think that in the mid-70s was a time of great flux in the minds of a lot of people. I can remember the one thing that very much affected myself, my family, and people around us was inflation. Inflation was a big deal, okay? It was something that was really angering people. And then the results of the oil shocks earlier in the decade and things like that, that was still with them. Coming out in the wake of Vietnam, of Watergate, which now, as we end 2024, I mean, Watergate was like holding up a liquor store compared to what we've seen in politics since then. But for people then, it was real. The liberal media hated Richard Nixon to its bones. Okay, they exaggerated Watergate way out of proportion. George and I've talked many times about that. But there was a sense of melees. That was not Jimmy Carter's word. He never said it, though it was attributed to him. Okay. Right. And so, I'm still a traditional guy. I speak well of the dead and stuff like that. But he was a failed president. Okay. And so when you read the obituaries, Jimmy Carter was a great guy. You're telling us, in between the lines, is that he wasn't a great leader. Okay.
And listen. George, I think that's Yeah, I think so. And to be honest, this whole thing about, oh, he was this really great guy. Well, he was the first president who really broke with the tradition of ex-presidents not speaking ill of their successors. He did that all the time. He spoke very ill of Ronald Reagan. You know, he didn't like him. He obviously resented, you know, his
Losing.
creating defeat at the hands of Ronald Reagan. But he often spoke ill of him. He spoke ill of George H.W. Bush. He spoke ill of Richard Nixon. I mean, admittedly, Nixon was a predecessor. He spoke ill of Trump. And again, if you're going to be this really nice guy, a really good person, that's a very strange thing to do. I mean, that, you know, after all, there is a certain etiquette involved that you don't speak ill of your successors. Richard Nixon, you know, he went on many years speaking out and everything. He never spoke ill
Never.
of his successors. Never said anything negative
He
about
would critique.
Jimmy Carter or Bill Clinton.
He would
Or
critique them. He would critique them, but he did not criticize. He was very old school about it. George is absolutely right. But as media developed and became more and more a part of our everyday life, I mean, Jimmy Carter got dumped on a lot too for a former president. Okay, and then I can't remember the event or even the year right now, but I mean, there was one time that he was. It might have been Ronald Reagan, but I mean, you know, at some point his press office just really pushed back. Okay, which was, you know, getting that kind of criticism out of office. There's a certain decorum. If you hate someone, you know, like George W. Bush, it's just like he's in the rear view mirror. We leave former presidents alone, and that whole tradition has unraveled. And I have to tend to agree with George. Jimmy Carter kind of was a pioneer there.
right, he was a pioneer because then, you know, everybody does this now. Obama is very much in that tradition. You know, was constantly attacking Trump. So again, I don't know what this niceness is. The other thing is, of course, it was a very dubious kind of qualification because nobody's ever looked to presidents as being nice guys. I mean, you know, there were some presidents who were liked personally. Eisenhower was a kind of a beloved figure, but ultimately, no one really thought, oh, well, you know, a president has to be a very nice guy. You know, the guy you want to have a pint with. And then again, you know, whether Nixon or there's Johnson or anyone else, I mean, it's basically, well, is he good at his job? You know, is he competent? And so when you look at Carter, you know, he was first of all, a micromanager. Now, that's a very bad thing for any president to be, because the president is supposed to have his eyes on the big picture. You know, you don't want to start messing around, getting involved in details. You leave that to your new huge staff, to all the different departments, and you don't start messing around with it. But and this is, you know, obviously this is a famous story, that he was even preoccupied with the tennis courts at the White House. Who's getting games and who isn't getting games on the tennis court? Why would a president waste his time on that? And I think that again undermined his presidency, because he tended to obsess about everything.
Well, and also,
made him look an ineffectual leader.
Also, Jimmy Carter, it's not as if it didn't happen before, but Jimmy Carter ended up being kind of a pioneer of how we assess how a president ages in office. Right. And no president aged more, I think. I mean, Donald Trump looks the same.
Yes, he does look the same. He hasn't changed. It's quite strong.
Jimmy Carter, he worked himself to the bone. He quite literally did. Oh, yeah, yeah. I mean, he left a haggard man. Now, of course, what he's always going to be remembered for, I gave one, I mean, because it was a personal one, was inflation. The other things was the deterioration of relations with the Soviet Union, the advent of the war in Afghanistan, which we know so much more about its origins now than we did then. And that's not even really historically debated anymore. And then the cancellation, the U.S. decided not to participate in the Moscow Games in 1980, which I think was a huge mistake. I thought it was a huge mistake at the time. A lot of people thought it was a mistake at the time. And then, of course, the what he will always be remembered for is the 444 days of the hostage crisis of the Americans in the American embassy in Tehran. That was that what broke him? I think he was just a weak president. George already pointed out that he tried to micromanage things. That's going to destroy any person. But that the way it was portrayed in the media was something we lived with every single day, day in and day out, day in and day out. Yeah, that broke him. That broke
Well, it
his
broke it, but
president.
again, you could see that what triggered this, the seizure of the hostages. Now, of course, the Iranians behave very, very foolishly,
Yep.
because it's such a fundamental violation of diplomatic protocol to seize diplomats. I mean, you just simply don't do that. So this was a disastrous decision that was made by the Iranians, but nonetheless, Carter knew ahead of time that if he allowed the Shah to come into the country, he wanted medical treatment, cancer treatment. So initially, Carter said no, he wasn't going to let the Shah come into the country, and he said, because if we do, our diplomats will be seized. He had a absolutely correct analysis of what would happen, and then he relented. I think he came under pressure. I think Brzezinski pressured him, Kissinger pressured him, and he relented. And sure, that as soon as that happened, boom, they seized the hostages. Now, the problem there was, again, Carter showed indecisiveness, which was a major failing on his part. He was constantly indecisive, made one decision, then he went back on the decision. But then he got very, very preoccupied with that issue, to the point when really over the last year of his presidency, this was an obsession with him. Now, understandable, again, very humane, but he's the president. He has to attend to a lot of other things, but he just got completely preoccupied with all these negotiations. And in the end, it just blew up in his face, because the Iranians really hated him. And, just to stick a thumb in his eye, they released the hostages on the day Ronald Reagan was
It's where we
inaugurated.
get the October surprise, everyone. That's
That's
what
right.
that's the origins of that. Okay, and we have to remember this indecision on the part of Jimmy Carter wrecked his own government. I mean, Cyrus Vance, he
Right.
resigned over
Right.
it. Okay, and so he had a lot of goodwill, but when in Washington, and it's obviously more so to this day, but when a drop of blood enters the water, that's when the feeding
Right.
frenzy starts. And Jimmy Carter was not equipped in any way, shape,
No,
or form. And George is right. I mean, he made that his presidency. He didn't have to do that,
right.
okay? But he
Right.
did.
Right. No, that's exactly right. To the point where he wasn't even campaigning seriously in 1980, even though he was told, "Hey, this is going to be a tough re-election campaign." Of course, he underestimated Ronald Reagan very foolishly. A lot of Democrats underestimated Ronald Reagan, even though they had the record. This guy was very successful. He was two-term governor of California. Won re-election comfortably. You should take him seriously. But instead, they were thinking, "Oh, this will be another like Barry Goldwater in '64." And it wasn't going to be that. So he really didn't campaign very seriously in 1980. He was so obsessed with this issue, and again, you have to think that, and with the issue with the hostages, the attempt to rescue the hostages, he kind of again was indecisive. He first again ruled it out because he thought it was a half-baked venture; it almost certainly would fail, and then he changed his mind and went ahead. And of course, it ended in disaster, as was again predicted. And then, as you say, it was catastrophic for his administration, because Cyrus Vance, who was a political heavyweight, he was the Secretary of State, he resigned in protest. So again, he made these terrible decisions. And of course, there was another one which is rarely talked about, which was the neutron bomb. Now, the neutron bomb, everyone's already forgotten about that, was another one of these Wunderwaffen, and Carter wanted the Europeans to take the neutron bomb, and Helmut Schmidt agreed to it, even though this was very unpopular within his own Social Democratic Party, which was, had moved very decisively in the direction of peace. So Schmidt taking this political risk of accepting the neutron bombs, and then Carter changed his mind. He said, "Nah, what the hell? We're not going to give you. We're not going to give you the neutron bomb." So Schmidt, basically, it was all beginning of the end for Helmut Schmidt.
Well, Helmut Schmidt, to show his displeasure, he at one point, as chancellor, went on vacation to the United States, and he purposely did not meet with Jimmy Carter. He took it really personal. Okay,
Right.
And of course, unfortunately, because of the traitorous and insane policies of the Green Party, which we've talked about, we will talk about, they're the ones that they cut their teeth on that. I mean, the Greens became a political force.
Right.
Intermediate range missiles, the neutron bomb, they became a viable political force, and they entered German politics in a way. It was, I can remember, everyone was stunned. This is like the new wave, the new kind of politics, and it was all because Schmidt was portrayed by the president of the United States.
Right, that's right. And it was very interesting. I mean, Schmidt really detested Jimmy Carter, and he talked later on how he visited Carter in the White House, and then Carter wanted to show Amy, Amy's bedroom to him. Oh, look, here's my beautiful daughter. She's sleeping. Schmidt said, why the hell do I need to look at your daughter sleeping? Well, what's that to me? So and then Brzezinski was very annoyed that Schmidt kept referring to him as Big. He just kept calling him Zbig. It's like, hey, who are you? You're not a friend of mine just to go around calling me Zbig. I mean, no one calls him Zbig. I mean, he's Zbigniew, or you can call him Mr. Brzezinski. But Schmidt kind of went out of his way just to, antagonize. He hated Brzezinski. He hated these absolutely intrepid cold warriors like Brzezinski. So calling him Zbig. Hey, Zbig. What do you think of this? Come over here, Zbig. So yeah, that was really the real disenchantment between the United States and West Germany. It didn't improve very much under Reagan, at least as far as Schmidt goes. Kohl was a different case, but with Schmidt, he really was totally disenchanted with the Americans.
Well, maybe to put a bow on this here, because I'm not enthusiastic about the topic one way or another. I mean, it like with Henry Kissinger, it wasn't an untimely death, George. Okay.
No.
History is not going to be kind to Jimmy Carter. It's been many, many decades right now, and he hasn't moved up in the assessment of his presidency. Richard Nixon has, as time goes on. Historians reassess Richard Nixon, and ever so slowly, Nixon moves up the ranks. Okay, right. Jimmy Carter never will. Never.
Right. I mean, when you think about the Carter administration obviously has the accomplishments, which is the Camp David Accords, which is an accomplishment. And really, when we look back on previous decades, there haven't really been too many diplomatic accomplishments for the United States. There used to be, there used to be these big treaties that were signed. There were the arms control treaties. There were these international covenants that the United States signed on to. I mean, there was obviously the Helsinki Final Act of 1975, and then there were all these things like the Non-Proliferation Treaty, the Biological Weapons Convention, the Chemical Weapons Convention. There were a number of these big agreements that took many years to negotiate that America used to sign on to, but there haven't really been. I mean, if you think of Camp David Accords, what other things have really happened? I mean, we had, of course, the Oslo Agreement. Well, that never came to anything. We had the agreement with Iran under Obama, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. That never came to anything. So it's hard to think of too many big diplomatic successes, since the 1978 Camp David Accords.
Americans don't like weak presidents. They don't. Okay, in politics, nice guys finish last. It's true. Okay, look at the guy that's still in the White House. He's a slob. He's a political, arsonist. Okay, He's got the double whammy. He's not liked and he's ineffective. I mean,
Right.
anyway,
Right.
it
Yes.
kind of brings us to what was 2024 all about, George?
Well, that's a very good question. I mean, I think that uh, to me, obviously, the big event of 2024 was the return of Donald Trump. I mean, I think that's the striking feature of this. Um, it was by no means clear that he would be able to pull this off. It didn't look that good for him after the midterms, where he, I think, unfairly got blamed for the Republicans' relatively poor performance. And then you had these criminal prosecutions against him, 4 separate criminal prosecutions. Then you had the civil suit pursued by the New York Attorney General. And to return in the way he did, it was an extraordinary achievement. Now we can talk about what to expect from Donald Trump going forward, but this was an extraordinary accomplishment. I mean, Nixon's comeback in '68 was an extraordinary accomplishment, but this, I think, surpasses the 1968 comeback.
Well, I mean, they didn't have the kind of lawfare. I mean, I don't remember any kind of lawfare back then.
No,
Okay,
no, no.
the lawfare that, and that ties into, I think, the other really big story is how the public, was systematically lied to about the condition of Joe Biden.
Right.
That's the other really, and it's kind of an interesting two sides of a coin here, because this systematic lying, Joe Scarborough, this guy's the best Biden we know. I mean, this was days before he was out.
Right.
Okay. Not that MSNBC should be the litmus test of anything, but I mean, that is the level of dishonesty that we were faced with. And and it still remains to be seen, who was running the country. We know about, they've come clean that, he wasn't dealing with a full deck of cards. We need to know more about that story, and they're not coming forward about it. We will eventually.
No, but we'll find out.
I mean, there's too many books and Netflix series and everything else to be made here. So, but the extension of that, the lawfare against Donald Trump, which a reasonable person would say, could be among the people saying, I really, really hate Donald Trump. I hope his complete, utter demise. I hope he goes to prison, but not the way you guys are doing it.
Right.
You mean you don't have anything real on this guy? Really?
Right.
And that was permeated 2024. All, I mean, there were people that were just looking for, give us something that we can all believe in. And that's what impeachment is supposed to be all about, and just political destruction, where there is a general consent, and they never generated a consensus.
No, but I mean, they tried to impeach him twice, and in neither case did they even remotely make any kind of a plausible argument as to why he should be removed from office. In either case, it's very hard even to explain what is it that you're claiming Trump did. What do you think? What is it that he did? And I never really explained in the first case. And again, in the second case, also, they just simply didn't. We just don't like Trump, and we want to make sure that he will never be able to run again. So there was an article in the Washington Post over the weekend in which it becomes clear that Biden, first of all, not only thinks that he made a mistake in dropping out of the race, and he thinks that he would have beaten Trump, but he said, well, one of his biggest regrets is hiring Merrick Garland as Attorney General, because he thinks Merrick Garland should have gone after Trump earlier. So that was his big mistake. He should have gone after Trump earlier.
I'm sorry, Joe Biden, your memory's playing games with you right now. Okay.
Yeah. Well, exactly. So in a way, he hasn't really learned anything. I mean, that it was a completely misconceived, but for the very reason you're saying, which I don't think Americans think that it's a good idea to go after your political opponents using the criminal justice system. I mean, that's just not the way the United States or any democracy is supposed to work, because it's clearly an abuse of the legal and judicial process. But Biden thinks, yeah, no, we should have gone after him earlier. The outcome would have been the same, because he would have still been stuck in the courts. I mean, it's clear that, the Supreme Court ruled the way it did. So you wouldn't have got anywhere going after him even earlier. Started a year beforehand, you would still be stuck in the courts. You wouldn't be able to get a criminal conviction of Trump, other than the kind of stupid criminal conviction. No one even understands what it's about, the one in New York.
And also an extension of that extension is, and something that you and I and many people in our lane have talked about at great length, is the complete collapse of the mainstream media. The level of trust in it is it's one of those things when you have a column that says NA, non-applicable. You can't even assess it now. It is so bad. Okay. And an extension of that extension is, and who would have thought, the complete, how to put it, standing of the Democratic Party in politics. There's a campaign of joy. Are you serious?
Right.
I mean, this is something that, I could have never even conceived of like a year ago. It's just like, we're going to have a campaign of joy, and you're going to rehabilitate one of the most marginalized, insignificant politicians on the national stage ever. Okay. Right. I mean, and this is I want to talk a little bit, if possible, about MAGA versus Vivek and Elon. I think this is playing into it. Just that the institutions that were once venerated, or at the very least respected, have been completely trashed by the people in power. Not the people trying to take power, by the people in power. Okay, and this is our long-standing criticism of the PMC culture in American politics. It's very, very elitist. The elitists were put on notice in 2024. Does that bode well for 2025? No, not necessarily. I'd say absolutely not. Okay, but 2024 was a year of reveals in many ways.
Right. Well, that's the interesting thing. I mean, of course, we really don't have anything like what one would expect from a media. I mean, you used to have a media. They had their biases. But now, when you look at the mainstream media, essentially, it's no longer any kind of a source of information, any sort of source. So if you want to know about an issue, you used to be, all right, well, I'll go and look in the New York Times. Maybe it'll explain to me what this is all about. But you don't have that anymore, because essentially they're all kind of political propaganda outlets, which all editorializing, and there's really no kind of factual reporting, and that is a striking collapse of mainstream media. Even reading the obituaries of Jimmy Carter, you're always coming across, hey, you're putting in a whole lot of very dubious opinionating and then editorializing in what is supposed to be essentially a factual account of somebody's life. But it's now ingrained that everything is just simply a matter of reporters putting in the officially sanctioned opinions. Trump falsely said, Putin falsely claimed, and always, Lavrov claimed without evidence, blah blah blah. Well, just tell us what he claimed. Don't tell us this without evidence. But this is now, what happens in the mainstream.
Well, media. I mean, George, for people like ourselves, many people that come to our podcast and watch my program and other podcasts that George and I have respect for, the mainstream media is just an indicator of what the party line is. That's the only reason why, that's the only time I ever come across it, is to figure out what is the dictums of the deep state, or of this bureaucracy, or this lobby. That's all you're getting. You're just getting a test of what their position is, and it's always against us. It's always against everybody that isn't in power. Okay, it's all patently obvious right now. You're not in the club. You're not invited, and you're despised, and you're to be manipulated. That
Right.
and that's all you ever see from these people.
Yeah,
And
no,
what makes it worse, and I will date myself, and I don't want to oversell the case, but a far cry from what a lot of people thought of Walter Cronkite. Now, I'm not going to go into if he was a good guy or a bad guy. That's another discussion. But there were people that say, at least when I watched him, I felt like I had a good idea of what was going on. Okay,
Right.
and I remember his broadcast. Obviously, he was cut from a kind of a liberal environment, but that was the American educational system. That was the public sphere was very much predicated on liberal ideas. Okay, you could be a conservative there and exist and even thrive because you knew what your juxtaposition was. But people didn't think that this guy's conning me. I'm watching him to see what the con is, because that's what people do now. People didn't do that then. Okay, so in retrospect, he's given way too many acolytes than he actually deserves. But nonetheless, it was kind of a litmus test. And we don't have anything like that. I mean, except for I don't know what happens to our viewers right now, but for some reason on YouTube, they're giving me all of the election coverage of all the liberal media on election night. So I got NBC, CBS. I don't know why it's coming my way. Thank you, algorithm, I guess. It's absolutely hysterical. I mean, they keep mentioning Joe Rogan. It's like, who is Joe Rogan? Well, if you don't know who Joe Rogan is and everybody else does, it should tell you something. So that these are these derivative things from this very deep mistrust of institutions, which the institutions have done to themselves. We haven't had a reckoning on COVID yet. Not yet. Maybe we will.
Right. Yeah. No, I think that's right, and it's and this is why I think that it's such a good thing that Trump won and Kamala Harris lost. So leaving aside all the shortcomings of Trump, had the Democrats won, I think the whole censorship regime would have gone into top gear, because they would have seen this as a vindication of everything that they had done during the COVID era, during the Trump era, and everything else, when they were really just kicking people off. I mean, everyone was just being kicked off the social media, and we were just terrified. Everybody was just terrified of what are you going to say, and because any minute, at any moment, YouTube is going to notify you, then that's it. You are permanently deplatformed, and you've lost all your work product. So that's one of the great reliefs that somehow again we can talk about Trump, but what the Democrats were trying to do, and it's still happening in Europe. Is that we can control the flow of information, all in the name of preventing misinformation. But basically, anyone we don't agree, boom, you don't have a platform anymore. And these days, of course, that's it. If you don't have a platform, you're gone. I mean, nobody knows about you. If you're not on YouTube, if you're not on Twitter, that's it, or Facebook, because they all worked in tandem. That's it. You're gone, and no one knows anything about what you're saying.
I think, speaking now on the 30th of December of this year, I think there's been a reprieve at the very least. But when we have someone like Pam Bondi and people like her coming into the new administration, the slur of anti-Semitism may be the new catchphrase for a new a wave of censorship. I'm expecting it, unfortunately. So that will be.
That's a very interesting. Yeah, go on. Anyway, you want to finish?
What I'm just saying is that's why I'm calling it a reprieve, because there's a high coincidence of confluence here of people that are very skeptical of American foreign policy backing Israel in Gaza and what it's doing in Syria right now. These same people are very critical of Israel, of the genocide, And a lot of those people are free speechers. I mean, that's why you come across them, because they're not on mainstream media. Who in mainstream media pushes back? I can't tell anyone that does.
No, well, I mean, that's the interesting thing, which is the Israel is the special case, because you have, the people, kind of we call the MAGA right, who are all gung ho for free speech, and absolutely, I got to have diversity of opinion and so on. But then when it comes to Israel, they don't adhere to that position at all, and in fact they're all gung ho for cracking down on views that they don't like.
Well,
It's
it's
extraordinary.
right. It's right wing DEI.
Right. That's right. It really is, and it's so stunning that, and then the lack of any self-awareness on their part. The first, this is liberal censorship. The crushing of alternative opinion, and then they adopt this view, and I think that it's this peculiar case of Israel, and then it goes back to this situation in which American, but particularly American elites, across the spectrum, have been persuaded that the interests of Israel and the interests of the United States are one and the same. It was a real masterful con job that somehow to persuade people, because even back in the 1960s, if you just look at YouTube, look at the interviews conducted by American journalists of Israeli politicians, or even NASA. Journalists still had kept in mind that somehow, well, there was Israel and there was the Arabs, and the Americans were kind of a separate party. They could act as honest brokers, help them reconcile their differences. But they never assumed that somehow Israel and America are one and the same, and that somehow Israel is batting on behalf of the United States. And that was that's the masterful con job. It's taken a certain number of years to pull off, but now they've succeeded in pulling it off.
Yes, and what's her name? Bari. What's her first name?
Barry Weiss.
Barry Weiss, excuse me. I saw her on a I didn't watch. I saw it as a clip that someone had used at a podcast, and I was like, how we were attacked on October 7th.
Right.
You see, we.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. Coming up, you would have been called and said, "What do you mean we?" I mean, they're separate parties.
Right.
They've been able to do that. Okay. I find it quite terrifying, because nobody likes to be called a racist. Nobody wants to be called an anti-Semite. We find these labels appalling. No one wants to be even remotely associated with it. But the people that hate free speech, and this exception, have no qualms whatsoever about applying it. And we've seen it, and I think we're going to see more of it. Okay. And these things end up always being a cudgel. I mean, it's not going to be, it'll be said directing very specifically on no, it ends up being a cudgel to limit speech in general. Okay.
Yes.
So we see a different emphasis right now, and I'm very worried about it. I mean, Pam Bondi, I remember her from Fox News. I mean, never struck me as being particularly bright. I mean, she was nice, a nice lady, pretty lady, and she was, she had that old kind of fashion value. I'm going to stick with my friends. I'm loyal, and all that. That's what attracts people from watching. They like that kind of character. Okay,
right.
And then saying we should, they should. If you're a foreigner, you should be deported, and if you're an American, the FBI should visit you. I mean, that's astounding. An incoming attorney general, and she will probably get approved.
She's going to sail through. Yes. Yeah, no one's raised any questions about her. And of course, because the U.S. government has so much leverage over American universities. I mean, a lot of these American universities, they only survive because of the huge amounts of money they get from the U.S. government, all the research grants, whether it's the NIH and the and the Pentagon, and they just
And
pour
student loans.
student loans. They pour in millions and millions of dollars into universities. So if you're going to condition that, if you're going to condition the grants from the U.S. government on what are they doing to crack down on quote anti-Semitism unquote, then that really is a chilling effect on free speech, because you say, oh yeah, that's we don't really like your policy of allowing Palestinians to organize a conference of Palestinian poetry. I think we're not going to give you this this Pentagon grant. That's a huge blow. Universities, they crave this money, and that's going to have a real effect on all kinds of dissident voices on the subject of Israel.
Yeah, and then if you there is an academic area of study. It's called Holocaust Studies. It's well known, okay, and it's well funded, and I think it should be. I think people should know what happened against the European Jews during the 1940s. I think that's an.
I don't know, because again, I mean, just I'll let you finish, but I just want to say that I'm very dubious about that.
Started it. Let me finish it. Okay? But making historical analogies about that. Okay, you have to bookend it. It has no other meaning outside of this or outside of that, and it's stifle academic study. And I think it's that's very damaging too, because you're putting up all of these guardrails where you can talk about what you can't talk about, and it will go into historical studies as well. And it shouldn't be. The Holocaust should never be used as a cudgel. It is today. I'm sorry.
I think the problem has always been, when you get to something like the Holocaust studies, is, well, why is this in any way separate from every other aspect of World War II? And I think that's already a distortion of what World War II was about, because it's part of a kind of totality of everything that happens in World War II. So when you isolate this, as if this is, people do get that sense. Well, that was the only thing that we know World War II is about, and that is, more and more, people are growing up. Well, there's nothing else to World War II other than the Holocaust. And you say, well, yeah, but
I remember
a lot of everything.
I remember as a young person that what was it called? It was called The Holocaust, the TV series. Okay. Right. And for a lot of people of my generation, that was the first thing that they'd actually. It was emotionally kind of burned into them on television. The reason why, George, I'm not disagreeing with you, but my point was, if the whole point of Holocaust studies is never again, then you're getting yourself into a very, very difficult situation, because one can easily make the claim, empirically true, it's happening again. We have a template of what happened to a certain group of people. It's happening to another group of people today, and it happens to be the people that they were the victims of it the first time, or the perpetrators this time. That's why I bring that up, because you're right, Joe. The people use this as a very special, a very unique historical event, and it's sanitized, it's protected, and all that. But if you want to have true historical studies, and you want to invoke the Holocaust, you could invoke it in the present. That's not what it was.
Yeah, but this is why. Well, I mean, my point is really that one thing that you notice, a lot of attacks are made on the Soviet Union. They say, well, the Soviet Union has always minimized the Holocaust. And say, well, how did it minimize the Holocaust? Oh, well, look, when Babi Yar, they didn't really talk about Babi Yar, and that was, why did they do it? Oh, well, because they're anti-Semitic, and But the reason why they didn't, make a fetish of Babi Yar or anything else, was that they said, well, this is part of everything that the Nazis did when they launched their invasion. There's no need to separate out, which is what so many of these advocates urge, that you somehow separate out. Well, let's just separate out Babi Yar, but we won't talk about anything else that happened in World War II. And that, I think that's what the Soviet Union did, which is why they said, yeah, if you're going to talk about what happened to the Jews, you have to talk about everything else that followed that the Nazi invasion. And you know, when I was growing up, that's kind of what people used to talk about. You know, World War II. They talk about everything that happened in World War II, including the World War II diplomacy and everything else. And when the Soviets launched their invasion of Europe, and so on. But now, when you kind of isolate these things, oh well, we don't want to talk about anything else. We just want to talk about Babi Yar. Then I think it presents a very distorted view, and it's deliberately. It's done deliberately.
You're making my point,
Yeah.
okay? Because I mean, I'll give you a good example, and I have to eat my words now. And YouTube appears to have returned the World at War series to its screens, which I'm very happy about. Just to embellish George's point, I think it's like a 14 part series, something like that.
Oh, I think it was more than that. I think it was more like 26 episodes.
I don't know if it's that many, but anyway, there is one episode about the Holocaust, okay? But it's the World at War doesn't start its first episode, the origins, the 0 hour of the Holocaust, and do it all the way through every single episode, which they would do today, okay? But George is absolutely right. In 1971, I think, when it was released, that was one part of a vast history of a world at war, okay? I think that was the rendition of history that we were brought up, and certain parts weren't fetishized. Okay, it's not like what happened to gay people during the Second World War. 20-part series. Okay,
right. No, that's exactly right, and I think that it's done deliberately, and then people forget about things. And of course, one of the consequences of people not really understanding and knowing about the history of World War II is, of course, that people have no understanding of what happened in the Soviet Union and the Soviet contribution to the great victory of World War II. I mean, that's just been gradually, steadily, step by step minimized, to the point, people growing up and would know very little about it. They know about, the D-Day landings. And then when they bring up the Soviet Union, they say, oh, yeah, but they grabbed Eastern Europe. They had a deal with Hitler in 1939. And then, of course, they grabbed Eastern Europe after the war. That's it. That's the sum and substance of what they know about the Soviet contribution. It's done deliberately.
Yes.
And again, it's like this thing with Babi Yar. It's a deliberate lie. I put this one as a total lie to besmirch the reputation of the Soviet Union and the Soviet effort to say, oh, well, the Soviets kept quiet about Babi Yar. They kept this a secret. So well, that's interesting. Well, didn't Shostakovich, right? He composed a music. Well, Babi Yar. There was Yevtushenko wrote a poem. But the history, is, oh, well, of course, they were anti-Semitic, so they just didn't really care what happened to the Jews. So this is a deliberate lie in order to get people to hate the Soviet Union and think the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany were just one and the same.
I stand corrected. 26 episodes. Thank you. George was right.
Yeah, it was a big. I remember it was a big show.
Well, you folks today you have no idea how good you have it, because when it came out, there were no VCRs that you could record it. You had to watch it when it was put on air, because you're not going to see it ever again, because it was under license. Okay, it wasn't a loop that went around and around and around. So I can remember watching the 26 episodes. I was riveted by it. Okay, and it was the first, at least for my memory as a young man, we'd never seen a British documentary project of that magnitude. Even my father, who fought in the Second World War in the Pacific, he was riveted by it too, because we'd never had anything quite like that in America. I don't know why. Because America's always fetishized the Second World War for one reason or another. But that was just that was a game changer for a lot of people. Okay. And to reinforce George's point is like, wow, the Soviet Union really paid during that war. That series did that.
That series definitely did that. And and at the time again, even the British, they tend to be very parochial, and they tended to preoccupy themselves with the Battle of Britain, and then of course the D-Day landings. Didn't really know too much about what happened between 1940 and 1944. Well, there was the Blitz, but nothing much else. And I think you're absolutely right. The World of War said, yeah, there was a hell of a lot that was going on, and that the war was decided on the Eastern Front. I mean, there's just no two ways about it. The war was decided there. It wasn't decided in the Far East. It wasn't decided at the D-Day landings. The war was decided on the Eastern Front, and I think that's why the Soviets always insisted that you have to look upon World War II as a totality. I mean, that's like everything that happened within it, and that's it's been a deliberate distortion of that history.
Or put it this way, everyone: the film Pearl Harbor that came out many years, I guess it's now many years ago, awful film. I thought it was breathtakingly bad. But the film lasted longer than the attack on Pearl Harbor. Okay, keep that in mind. Okay, the film lasted longer than the attack itself. And like George is saying, what made The World at War such a critically acclaimed series is that most countries will get a look at the like Italy when they killed Mussolini. That's the history of the Second World War. Yeah, we got rid of Mussolini. Okay,
Mussolini.
But for the British, it's the Blitz. Okay, the Blitz. That's the Second World War. And for the French, well, they prefer not to remember the war at all. Okay, and then the Japanese, of course. The war started the attack on Hiroshima and ended on the attack on Nagasaki. That's the entire Second World War. The United States, we have Pearl Harbor and we have D-Day. And the World at War just said, those are only very thin parochial slices. And the World at War, aptly titled. Okay.
Right. No, that's exactly right. And this is where you get this pernicious trend within in the West. Now, I'm trying to remember the 75th anniversary of the D-Day landings. That was in 2019. Were the Russians invited to that? So that was long before the Ukraine thing. I don't remember. I know they weren't invited to the 80th anniversary.
It was after 2014, so absolutely they were not. Okay, because
This policy has been. This was again. It started by the West. The West has launched this essential policy of not recognizing the Soviet contribution. It wasn't started. It wasn't the Soviets. The Soviets said, "Hey, we did all the heavy lifting, and so you better shut up." And they never did that. This was always decided by the West to minimize Soviet contribution.
I don't remember the year, but it was the Victory Day parade in Moscow had been politicized. It's been politicized now for many years. I don't remember exactly the year, but the British said that they were not going to send a delegation, and all the other NATO countries followed suit and whatnot. And what the Russians did is that they invited, all expenses paid, to the sailors that went to Murmansk through the wolf packs. Okay, I mean, I don't think you can get like an 18 or 19. We're going to put you on the ship to go through the Arctic, and there's going to be submarines looking for you to kill you. Okay, nobody would sign up for that today. Nobody. Okay, no. There were young kids and longshoremen and all of that. And even in the 1920s, the British stockworkers would go on strike. To protect the Soviet Union. I mean, that was a political thing for them. I'm not saying that the sailors that went from the UK to Murmansk were politically motivated. I can't speak to that, but they were heroes for what they did. And many of the survivors were invited to front seat. If a politician doesn't want to sit there, who cares about politicians? Who cares? These people were genuine heroes. They actually did something to deserve the praise. Okay, so that's how they deal with it. I mean, unfortunately, George, commemoration Victory Day in Russia is gone for the West. They will not ever do it again. It's gone. There's not going
Yes.
to be a
Yeah.
return to it. Gone.
No. That's right. It's kind of amazing that they've pulled this off really without any criticism. Because let's say you're a German. Now let's say all right, you're a patriotic German. Let's say you don't like the Russians. Okay, and you don't like what the Russians did in Ukraine. You would still say, hey, we're the Germans. What we did in Russia is so terrible. It's so reprehensible. It was such a completely unprovoked attack. I don't know, how many millions we killed. We kind of owe it to go and commemorate. We don't really have the right to say, "Oh, you're morally beneath us. We can't possibly take part in this commemoration because we're so much above you. We're on such a morally elevated plane." Germans just don't have the right to do that, and none of the countries that took part in that invasion, in the Barbarossa, whether it's Romania or Hungary, Italy, France, none of them has the right to say, "Oh, we're boycotting this. This is just simply,
Well,
we're such
I
great guys."
I have been criticized over the years, but this is the new Germany. This is Germany doesn't have to pay for the sins of their ancestors. And I say, no, there is a new Germany because there was that Germany. Okay, that's why you have the new Germany. So no, you can't separate them. I'm sorry. I over the years I've had many very good German friends. This has never been an issue of discussion with people I know. Okay.
Right. No, that's exactly right, and that's why you would think that during the times of the Cold War, they would still mark the the commemoration. I mean, Helmut Schmidt, used to say, well, whenever I'd meet Brezhnev, um, he would bang his fist on the table and he would start going on and on about what the Germans did in the Soviet Union. And I tried weakly to argue, well, many of those Germans were just simply young patriotic Germans. They didn't really have any animus towards the Russian people. They just did as they were told. But he said, Brezhnev, he just wouldn't take it. He would just simply bang his fist on the table and would just, go through all the things that the Germans had done. I said, yeah, well, I kind of agree with you, but that doesn't mean you can besmirch all Germans. And the Soviets haven't besmirched all Germans. They never said all German people are evil, or that even all Germans back then were evil. But you kind of have to acknowledge, what Brezhnev was getting at when he was banging his fist.
And also, language counts. I mean, and if you look at Russian media, even to this day, they talk about the fascists, the Nazis. There is not a universal condemnation of the Germans. That would be inappropriate, and people would be called out for it as well. Okay. The Nazi regime, the Hitlerite regime. This is not the Germans. Okay, that would for a lot of people it just would sound wrong. Now, does that mean that they have a love for the German people? Well, no, I wouldn't go that far at all. Okay, not at all. Okay, but no, I mean this is a lament George and I have had since we've known each other, and this goes on many years right now. This is how history is distorted and how painful it is for me knowing that history to see how it is being distorted, and it's being for political reasons. George, it wasn't too many years ago that you'd get to a certain point and say, well, let the historians decide. No, the politicians decide.
Right. And this kind of goes back then to 2024, that you had the election change, say, in the United Kingdom. One of the big three, and Keir Starmer replaced Rishi Sunak, and the change is absolutely imperceptible. There's absolutely no change at all. The Russophobia
elections don't have consequences.
Yeah, the elections have no consequences. Exactly. But the animus and the desire to continue with this war in Ukraine. Absolutely no change whatsoever. And that I think is what is striking, a reason why, maybe foolishly, people have some hope for Donald Trump. Probably naively and not foolishly, but he does talk a different game from say Sunak and Starmer and Scholz and what's the name, Merz, who's going to be probably the next German chancellor. He does say we're going to bring this war to an end. They never say that. They just simply say, yeah, we're gonna give Ukraine whatever it wants. We're gonna keep this war going. And that's why I think people think, well, okay, well, here's somebody who actually seems to think that it's imperative to bring it to an end. But what happens then? I think it's a very different question. But I think the tone of Trump is, I think, different.
Well, it's something. It's something to nip at, I suppose. George and I've been over this a few times, and where I stand right now is that I'm going to be very generous, very generous. I'm going to give it 6 months. Okay. I'm going to keep an open mind. I'll be critical, but I'm going to keep an open mind. But what's being leaked, selectively linked, whatever, to the media for the rest of us to consume, I just don't have any confidence here, because the entire approach is inappropriate to the solving the issue at hand. Okay. It's still, every issue is a nail and the solution is a hammer, and they have to break out of that paradigm. And given the folks that have been empowered or allowed to speak for the incoming administration, they trip up every single time. Because again, I don't want to sound trite here, but George and I look at the words. What do the words mean? Okay, then that's our point of departure. And delaying NATO membership, you're not following the other side's discourse here. Stationing troops in NATO troops in Ukraine. Hello, is anybody listening to the other side?
Right.
Lavrov came out in the last news cycle about this.
Right, but that's in a way, to be honest, is going by a recent history. In a way, that's the good thing, because I kind of feel that maybe I'm a little pessimistic. I think that if the Americans offered an offer, say, look, let's just put a let's have put a ceasefire, an armistice. We'll put the NATO membership on the back burner, and then let's have a conference, and we're going to sort out all our issues in the future. I have a feeling that the Russians might accept such an offer, but I don't think that's going to happen.
I don't either,
because I think that the Americans, even it's like they think, hey, they're going to put in something else into this deal, something that will make it to the point the Russians say, well, no, we can't accept this. So they'll probably put in, okay, well, we're going to have a referendum. Let's have a referendum on NATO membership in 2 years, or well, let's station American troops in the meantime. So they're always going to do this. They're always going to put something in there, which will, and the Russians say, well, there's no way we can ever accept this. So if you think of that deal, the Istanbul deal, which I think we've agreed was a terrible deal for Russia, but it was, we were saved because Johnson, the West got so greedy that they want to, hey, we want a victory. We want to really win this one. And that's why the deal fell through. But imagine if the West were ever restrained in their initial demands. I think we might be in a lot of trouble then.
Well, first of all, we're not going to have another Istanbul process. Now, Istanbul template might be dusted off and updated, which I would be aghast by, but okay, that's a possibility. Number two, there's no, why? Finish my thought. Istanbul, because that was a Ukrainian-Russian endeavor. That's not going to happen. That's not on the agenda. It's not remotely possible. So take that away. I don't think there's going to be negotiations the way George just described it, for the very reasons that George just gave us, is that there's always going to be, and we're going to introduce this caveat and this caveat, which is a recipe for Russia admitting a strategic defeat. Oh, well, we got NATO troops in Ukraine. Yay, we won. Okay. They're always going to look for that. That's not going to happen. I don't see that this, like, let's freeze the conflict and let's have a conference in Vienna. No, that's not going to happen. It just will not happen for the reasons that George just explained.
Yeah, I hope that's right. I hope, yeah.
Well, that would be a catastrophic.
Right, blunder. But I think the Minsk. I think Minsk was pretty catastrophic, and I don't know. Again, Russia agreed to Minsk.
Well, but I don't want to say these are apples and oranges. Okay, that's going too far.
Well, but Istanbul, Russia agreed to Istanbul.
Minsk had different players involved. Okay, and in France and Germany were essentially and Russians were the chaperones. Okay, that's the way it should have worked. In the end, it didn't, because it was sabotaged every step of the way. They knew even before the ink dried, they knew that this was a ruse. Okay, the Russians didn't, and shame on the Russians.
Well, yeah, but look, at that moment in 2014, Russia was very strong and could have basically taken the Donbass, incorporated it into the Russian Federation. There would have been a legal basis for it, saying, "Hey, look, you overturned the democratic election. There was a legal, legitimate government in Kiev. You overthrow it. These people, they just don't accept this government." And that's the legal basis. I mean, you could argue, hey, how convincing is it as a legal argument? But nonetheless, they could have made that argument. And there was a referendum. There was a referendum in 2014. But the Minsk process was about forcing the reincorporation of the Donbass into Ukraine. So against the will of the people there who had just expressed their wishes in a referendum. And again, when you think of Istanbul, which was a bad deal, but on the contrary, Russia say, "Well, we agreed. We were all set." So that deal would have been signed had it not been for Johnson's greed and the Biden administration's greed and zeal in trying to inflict humiliation and strategic defeat on Russia. So we were spared a terrible deal.
But that's the point, George. That was a deal that was negotiated by the Russians and the Ukrainians, and it was interrupted by outsiders. We're not going to have that again. It's impossible. What's going to happen, it's going to be a US-Russia deal, if there's any deal at all. Okay. Sure, they'll have different chairs around the table for their supplicants from NATO. That's fine. They can sit at the table. Okay. They can be on the junior menu and all of that. But we're not going to have a Minsk process. We're not going to have an Istanbul process. That is just simply not on the cards. And that is something that I don't think is the Americans really realize, okay? Because they put themselves into the box of nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine. Well, that's ridiculous, and everybody knows it, okay? So, I mean, I want to see the end of this, of course, okay? But the way the incoming Trump administration is approaching it, at this point, I have zero belief that it's going to come to fruition, because they're approaching it from the wrong perspective, okay? Because if you're trying to claim this is all about Ukraine, well, then, go jump in a river, okay? Because it's not.
Right.
Because American missiles are killing Russian citizens in Russia, okay? This is a American-Russia thing. It's not about Ukraine. It has never been about Ukraine.
All right. So let's take a look at some of our friends on our locals page.
What do you mean, where's Buddy? Here's Buddy, okay? Pay attention, everybody.
But Buddy's just expressing his disgust. Hey, I got to get the tip jar action moving. There's it's not there. I have no interest in this. So these are our friends, the people who contribute to the Gaggle. The people who actually allow Buddy to enjoy the life to which he has become accustomed, even though he's grateful. Hey, I could be living better. I could be living in the lap of luxury as I should be. So anyway, so the first question is from Stone River. Thank you very much, Stone River. It's our good friend. Says the way that Biden was pushed aside and Kamala installed made a mockery of the presidential primary system. Yeah, an integral part.
Democratic primary system.
That's right. Well, the Democratic presidential primary system. Yeah, an integral part of the cherished U.S. presidential election system. How will this influence future primaries, and how will future historians view the 2024 fiasco? Okay.
Well, most historians are very liberal, so I'm not sure they're going to address it the way George and I would address it. I mean, this is the complete inversion of democracy. I mean, and many people are aware of it at the time. Okay, the Democratic Party hasn't come to terms with it right now. They have to have a come to Jesus moment on this. They're not even remotely close to it right now. What they did was that they with that bastardization of their own Democratic primary process is that they alienated the base of the Democratic Party. Okay, I mean, it was a catastrophic thing for them to do. Now, you know, George is very good in the history of primaries and how they've changed over. We've had a couple of conversations about it. Again, whatever you think of Donald Trump, whatever you think of the Republican Party, they had real primaries. I mean, again, 2016. I mean, if Trump's election this year is world historic, I mean, it's doubly world historic in 2016 that he was able to use the primary system as it existed, their own rules, and triumph the way he did. And also it goes with 2024. I mean, he still has the establishment to deal with. He has a lot. They talk about all of these billionaires. Yeah, well, they came out after the election. A lot of these billionaires like, oh, we like Trump now, okay? Because he'll do what we want, okay? But historians should be very harsh, very, very harsh.
Well, I think so. And I think, you know,
anything.
Right. The modern primary system, you know, came into existence really in 1972. Following the
debacle.
Yeah, that's exactly the 1968 debacle, when the party leaders essentially decided that Hubert Humphrey would be the nominee, even though Humphrey had not run in any of the primaries. And so they said, okay, well, we're not going to do this again. So the Democrats, you know, they set up this committee to discuss, you know, how we should go forward. And the chairman of that committee was, of course, George McGovern, who instituted those reforms. And then McGovern, of course, made use of that in 72. But the problem arose almost immediately because, of course, the Democrats said, "Hey, this is terrible. You know, we're gonna get these extremists coming along. Either, you know, you got an extremist like McGovern who's gonna lead us to disaster, or you get somebody like Jimmy Carter who made use of that primary system, but who just wasn't tested in the ways of Washington. You know, he just didn't know how to maneuver his way. So they've been manipulating the primary system ever since. You know, they kind of created Super Tuesday. That the whole point of Super Tuesday,
and super delegates,
and the super delegates, exactly. So you basically you accumulate these things so that therefore somebody can just do this blowout, you know, win on Super Tuesday, and then that's it. The whole process is at an end. Or if the worst comes to the worst, and you have somebody like Bernie Sanders, or you know some who wins out, then there'll be the super delegates to make sure that, you know, we'll keep it from the hands of Bernie Sanders. What they did this year, they went just, you know, even too far. And they said, okay, well, we're just going to basically shove Biden aside and replace him with Kamala Harris. The problem was that at least when you had the smoke-filled rooms, when you had all the party leaders like, you know, Mayor Daley and you know, the big organized labor, and you know, all those people deciding who should be the leader, they actually selected the strongest candidate. I mean, it's a pretty good bet to say Hubert Humphrey was a strong candidate. I mean, he was a very powerful figure in the Democratic Party. He'd been around for many years, and saying, okay, I think he's the person who should lead us. What they did this time is they essentially it was like the smoke-filled rooms, but they got themselves with Kamala Harris, who was not by any stretch of the imagination a strong leader. The smoke-filled rooms would never have gone for someone like Harris to be the standard bearer of the party.
Yeah, and another thing, well, because it's being debated within the Democratic Party about how could it go so wrong. I said earlier that YouTube, for some reason, has been suggesting these election nights coverage from the liberal television cable stations and networks. And one of the things that keeps coming up, which is very bewildering. See, I live outside of the United States. I've lived a long time out of the United States. So a lot of some of the most popular cultural figures, their names are bandied about, and I just don't know who they are. I don't feel I'm at a loss or anything, but this person, she came out and supported Kamala Harris, and it just, why would an average person in Illinois or Iowa or Florida how could they even remotely connect with these people? Hey, you might like their little jingle on the radio, but I mean, and so what? Okay, and that's one of the things that I keep hearing, that Taylor Swift, I think her name, she endorsed her at the last second. Like, okay, I mean, isn't this woman like a gazillionaire? Okay, I mean, probably have bodyguards 24/7, lives in a mansion with guarded, it is gated and all that. I mean, how do you remotely relate to somebody like that?
Right. Now that's a very interesting question. I've always wondered about whenever you had these Hollywood endorsements, whether they really ever made any difference. I mean, with Kennedy, you had, that was really the first time when you had kind of Hollywood intervening, and Kennedy hung out with Hollywood friends, and particularly Frank Sinatra, who campaigned very vigorously on behalf of Kennedy. And he even had that whole campaign song, High Hopes. But that, of course, in the end, blew up in the face of Kennedy, because then the Kennedy administration went after Sinatra and all his connections with the mafia. So that was all very, very unpleasant. But I don't know whether these Hollywood endorsements have ever helped.
Well, I'm glad
candidate.
You brought up Frank Sinatra. Is that was because of his mob connections, and they they didn't want the Hoover FBI sniffing around, so they wanted to have and there was already huge skepticism of Bobby Kennedy even before. Okay, and anyway, so the big thing was to have John F. Kennedy have a sleepover at a designated place. I don't know if it was Sinatra's home itself or a place that was his territory, and he never pulled it off. And some people say that even Sinatra's life was at stake because he didn't succeed in his mission.
Well, but what happened?
And he was given a pass.
Right. But what happened is that Kennedy was coming to Hollywood, and it was expected that he would stay with Sinatra, and Sinatra made did the whole place up, in order to ensure security and everything. And then Kennedy decided to go and stay with Bing Crosby. Now, Crosby had been a Republican to the extent that he was political at all, but he was a Republican. He was one of these Hollywood Republicans. They used to be Hollywood Republicans. He stayed at Bing Crosby. This was the ultimate insult to Sinatra, and really led to his real bitterness. He turned against Kennedy, and that was a step-by-step process where he ended up supporting Ronald Reagan and hanging out with Ronald Reagan, and generally Sinatra's move to the right came after this insult that he got from Kennedy. But Hollywood, I don't think any longer even has that cachet. I mean, I can't. These people that you mentioned, Taylor Swift or Beyonce, I mean, they're kind of musicians. I mean, they're not even Hollywood. So, does Robert De Niro? I mean, does anyone care? What Robert De Niro says, or whom Robert De
What
Niro?
was the last big film he made? Was The Irishman? Was that it?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, I didn't see it.
God, that film was awful. Oh my God, it was awful, awful. God.
Yeah.
I mean, I suppose we're just kind of portraying how alienated we are. I mean, these people don't have any meaning to me at all, but apparently in their ecosystem, it's the be all and end all. It's just a mystery to me. But also that kind of dovetails a little bit into the popularity or the growing unpopularity of Elon Musk. Okay.
Right.
Because it happened way sooner. George and I talked about this today. This happened way faster than I ever would have expected. I said, Vivek and Elon will have a falling out in the first 6 months, and then Trump will fall out with both of them, and that'll be done. But it's this. We did a podcast on it yesterday, and because of the podcast I watched, I was bombarded all day. George and I did it first, okay, and I saw all the other podcasters do it after we did it.
Right.
And I have to admit they used more multimedia than we usually use because they showed all the tweets and all of that. But this is, there's this H1B visa. This is so telling. This is so telling, okay? Because make America great. We can make America great using these visas for foreign workers. That doesn't ding 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 sound right to a lot of people. Okay, and Elon Musk and Vivek, they made complete fools out of themselves in the last 36 hours. I'm sorry.
I agree. I think that they wanted to have this fight. They could have just simply kept a low profile. Let Trump do the easy stuff first. We'll start building the wall. Start deportations. Say, hey, that's it. We're going to end the illegals. We're going to have. We're going to return the stay in Mexico policy. All of those things, and then you can say, well, now that we've closed that loophole, the illegal migration loophole, well, maybe we should still think about increasing legal migration. Then you can talk about it. But to start talking about this before you've done anything, you're still 3 weeks out from the Oval Office, and you start talking about this H1B, particularly H1B, which is a notoriously corrupt system. It has been talked about for years. And even Trump talked about it in 2016. He attacked it in 2016 as saying that this was a way of screwing over American workers. And so Musk and Vivek to go in there, enter this debate. Now, Musk has now backed away from it, but the damage has already been done. He's done it because he's saying, hey, this is the kind of person we're talking about. He's a billionaire. He's not even, he's an American citizen, but basically he's not an American. And he wants to, use the American government to get cheap labor working in companies.
The way Elon and Vivek framed this was self-defeating from the get-go, because this makes Silicon Valley great again. It makes Silicon billionaires great again. Oh, I'm sorry, richer, even richer. Okay. Right. This has nothing to do with America. That was the problem with this debate. It had nothing to do with America. It had everything to do with self-interest. And I don't know the person that did it, because I was ironing clothes when I was listening to the podcast, so I didn't look up. Do a deep dive into these visas. These are not Einstein. These are not genius visas. These are not. These are middle class jobs. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. The middle class jobs, because the fact is that America has never had any problems bringing really super talented people to the country. I mean, there was no H1B program when they brought Einstein to the country. There was no H1B program when they brought in Werner von Braun. So there was never any problem, and there already exists the O1 program that brings in people of exceptional talent. The problem was this H1B, which is a way of bringing in, essentially just foreigners, and who can do, who are doing jobs that Americans can very easily do. And, even if you can't, you say, oh, we can't find Americans to do the job. I bet anyone with a proper, science, computer education, you give him a 2-week training course, and he'll be able to do this job. Don't give me this thing, oh, well, he can't do this job. Of course he can do this job. If you've got a STEM degree, if you've got a degree in computer science, you can do pretty much any job. And these are not super specialized positions. They are very routine positions. It's a scam. Everybody has known H1B is a scam. And that's the one that they chose to pitch their battle on. They didn't say, well, we still need to, we need to bring in really talented people, because then you say, yeah, sure, we can bring in really talented people. No, they chose to fight on this H1B visa.
Let's see what I said yesterday, and people will accuse me of being a libertarian. I am not, okay? But there is the issue of the American educational system, because higher education is a huge grift and scam. I mean, unbelievable. Okay, they can only compete with big pharma, okay, and big hospitals and all of that. Is that you have to prioritize. If you want to push them, give out really good, generous scholarships. Get rid of dance. Get rid of political science. Get rid of sociology. You can learn all that on YouTube in your own time. Okay, you go ahead. They're ebooks. You don't even have to go to a library. If you're all interested in that stuff, good, do it. Okay, but. And I agree with the national security priority. Okay, I want to see a lot more STEM people. Okay,
right. That should. But I don't see that there's a shortage of them. Yeah. I mean, I agree.
What we see in our culture is, influence. I want to be an influencer and all that. Okay, well, whatever.
Right, you got that, but I don't think there's a shortage. Really, there isn't a shortage of people doing science and engineering.
I don't think there's a shortage. It should be a priority. That's all I'm saying.
Right. Okay, that's fine. But I think that, if you go to Harvard or Stanford, there's no shortage of people applying for those, places. I mean, there's a huge backlog of students applying, American students applying to do those things. So I just don't think. I mean, this is kind of the argument that Vivek may want to make. Oh, they're not doing that because they want to. They want to do some ridiculous subject. No, I mean, there are plenty of people who do STEM, but if, however, they don't have any hope of getting a job at Facebook or Microsoft or any of those big companies that they think about, then they're not going to do it. They're going to go and do something else. Again, I mean, and we don't even have to talk about, that they're going to do English or sociology. They'll go become lawyers, who are basically kind of political
marketing people. No,
they'll do that, because if they don't really have any prospect of getting those jobs at these illustrious companies.
I'm agreeing with you. I think these visas should be scrapped immediately, ASAP. Okay, and those that will be the nation states that will be powerful and influential will be the states that prioritize technological advances. Okay, there are more people. I saw this a few months ago. There are more young people in China studying STEM in higher education than all people in America studying higher education. Okay, they've got it right. They have the priorities right. Okay, because that's good. Whoever wins the technological battle will win. It's as simple as that.
Okay. No, I mean, I think it's there should be.
The American educational system is not geared for that. It's geared to milk the middle class of money.
No, I think so. But you also have to say that those American universities that offer science, engineering, computers, they are the best in the world. I mean, Harvard, Stanford. I mean, that's the one people want to go to. I mean, that's it. The Chinese students want to go there. Indian students want to go there. They do offer really first class thing. But there's also the security question. I think there's a real question. If you're at Stanford, how many Chinese students are you really going to take? Because a lot of them are going to be engaged in spying. They want to know exactly what's going on in the laboratories of Stanford. And, they're going to be passing on this information. I mean, there's a reason why the Chinese encourage their young to go to these outstanding universities.
And George, and that's why I said it's a national security priority. Right. I agree with you. Okay. Right. There are plenty. 330 million people. Come on. Come on. No, you got a good sample there. That's pretty large. Okay.
That's right.
Not to echo Vivek, which I think really he got himself on a really bad footing in his. It's just typical for Vivek. He's just uncouth. I mean, he's a smart guy. I don't deny that. Okay, but. Stay in your lane. Stay in your lane. Elon, stay in your lane.
Right. But I think, No, I think so. And I think it always, yes, Vivek was born in the United States. Nonetheless, his parents were immigrants. And it never looks good when somebody, who's, not really an American, he certainly didn't grow up in a particularly American culture, starts criticizing and declaring all the various shortcomings of Americans and American culture. It doesn't look good. Americans can do this. Americans can criticize themselves and tell us, why they think this is bad and that's bad and so on. It just didn't look good. And for somebody who aspires, yes, after all, he ran for president, aspires to be a leader. If you have such contempt for the people that you want to lead, I just don't think it's good. And I
like Hillary Clinton in 2016 to me.
Right. Yeah.
We have all the smart people, all the zip codes, all the smart zip codes. It was an echo of that. Okay. Right. Yeah. Again, that's what that spiked our interest in it, because this is an elite mentality. Okay. Right. The people always have shortcomings. You have shortcomings. Okay. Right. We need to pull you up. Okay.
Right.
It's a complete inversion of what the founders had when it came to democracy.
No, that's exactly. You don't tell people their shortcomings, and that kind of brings back a little bit of what we were talking about earlier with Jimmy Carter. Why the Malays speech, even though you're right, he never used the word Malays. Why that went down so badly is that he was exhorting Americans to do better, to be better.
And you remember, George, again, the setting is so important to that historical story. Is that he went up to Camp David for a few weeks? So yes. He's up, he's loftily, he's elevated, he's in this pristine environment. And the more it was, and then he had like philosophers visit him and poets. So remember that? There was this whole train of people going up there. And, my father hated Jimmy Carter. I just hated him. Okay. And then there he goes again. He's like the Pope. He's trying to pontificate. He's trying to tell everyone how to believe. It's none of his business what we believe. My father was totally old school. Okay.
Right.
And this was like catnip for people that hated that elitist attitude. Okay. And it was on full display. And then, of course, the media came up with the melees, because he never said it himself. Right. And even my father was like, yeah, well, CBS and NBC got that right. Okay. I mean, he hated agreeing with them. Okay.
Right.
Because he thought they were all pinko communist sympathizers. My father thought everybody was a communist.
Right. But at that time, if one looks back on the 1970s, there was quite a fashionable point of view that somehow, America was just full of shortcomings. There was a lot, was wrong about America. And you think about the movies that were made at the time, everyone was kind of miserable. Everyone's depressed.
Dog Day Afternoon.
Yeah, exactly. Everything was just terrible.
Great,
You know,
I
yeah.
love that.
That's
It's
why,
such
yeah, Dog Day Afternoon, and no, so everything was sort of grim and dismal.
Deer Hunter.
The Deer Hunter, though that Deer Hunter, I think, idealized. There was a kind of idealized, picture of America, particularly the immigrants who had come to
Yeah.
America. So there was a little bit of that, but yeah, it was the
I
aftermath
mean,
of Vietnam.
the introspection. There was a
Yes, it was
great deal of
introspective. So Carter was kind of tapping into something. I think he didn't realize just how badly that will come across, because it's one thing Hollywood doing this, but another thing for an American president to tell the American people that they had these shortcomings, and particularly somebody who was so self-righteous and sanctimonious, and I think it just was a disaster for him. I mean, there was again, he had a lot going for him. He was the first president, I think, since the Civil War who came from the South. I mean, that was the first one. But he was just so sanctimonious. I mean, Bill Clinton. I never liked Bill Clinton, but for different reasons. At least he wasn't sanctimonious. He never said that somehow I'm on a morally higher plane than you are. So,
Well, I mean, and let's face it. I mean, Bill Clinton's nickname was Bubba. Okay,
that's right. Yeah.
and
Yes.
he could easily dip into the gutter. Okay, he had no problem doing that. Okay, I mean, I think I have the lowest possible opinion of Bill Clinton, but he was an amazing retail politics guy. I mean, I've always said, we can always kind of bookend whatever decade we want, but in the 20th century, Richard Nixon and Bill Clinton were the best retail politicians of. Bill Clinton was the best of his generation. Dick Nixon was the best of his generation.
Right.
And totally different people.
Okay? Right. Exactly. Very, very, very much different. But the interesting thing again about the Carter, who was almost like a politically suicidal, because in 1976, his skill was that he was able to appeal to the George Wallace vote. That was still powerful in the South, the Deep South. He was able to appeal to the George Wallace vote. He was ambiguous. He was very careful not to show, hey, I'm one of these liberal Southerners, I hate racism in the South. He didn't do that. So he made this pitch to the George Wallace vote, and he won. He won the South. It was against.
Well, remember Andrew Young? Remember Andrew Young?
Exactly.
Well, obviously that was really, really powerful, because Andrew Young had a civil rights pedigree. Okay. Right. And so that kind of smoothed the tracks for him here. And Andrew Young, I mean, he got a bad rap. I think history is harsher on him than they should be, because he was really one of the great leaders of the civil rights movement. He's not remembered for that. He's remembered as being an advisor to Jimmy Carter. But I mean, he was a really good operator, very amazingly articulate. And, I have to admit to everyone, in 1976, having an articulate Black voice was still new for a great deal of America. And Andrew Young was I'll listen to this guy. This guy's smart. Okay.
Right.
My parents.
That's true. But at the same time. Yeah.
Well, no. Go ahead. I didn't hear what you said.
No, but at the same time, I mean, the problem was for Carter is that Andrew Young during the Carter years didn't really distinguish himself. But more seriously for Carter, he essentially, he made an onslaught against these kind of the Southern schools. He accused them of segregation, and he lifted the tax exemption for these religiously based schools in the South. And the Southerners didn't really think that Carter would do this, because he said, oh, well, these religious schools, they're practicing segregation. And he lost the South completely. So from having won the South in 1976, 1980, Reagan took all of the South. So, he completely undermined the very basis of his success. I mean, after all, the whole Nixon revolution, that he took the South. He went in. The Republicans had never done this, but he won the South. And then Carter kind of got it back And then Carter lost it, and that was it. That was once and for all. And they never, even with Bill Clinton, he didn't win most of the South.
And the juxtaposition, it's really interesting because we're talking about Nixon and Carter. Most people don't do that. But see, Nixon's Southern strategy was very, very conscious. I mean, he knew what he was doing, okay? Jimmy Carter didn't really know what he was doing.
No. He didn't. He thought, hey, well, I got to be, I got to fight against segregation. Well, once he did that, he lost the South. And then Ronald Reagan
Ronald Reagan swooped it back up. Okay,
he kind of scooped it back up, and that was it. That's again. It showed Carter's lack of any real political abilities.
It's interesting, we've talked about obviously because Jimmy Carter just recently died, but we've talked about Richard Nixon, we've talked about Ronald Reagan, we've talked about Bill Clinton. These are giants.
Right.
Okay, you can disagree with them and hate them. It's okay with me, but they were giants.
Right.
Who do we have now? No, Trump, except for Trump. And again, he's just a separate category. He's in the Trump category. Okay, right. Maybe we'll compare others to Trump in the future. I doubt it. I don't think for a very long time. And this is just like a rare mineral they found, and it's not on the chart. Okay. Right. My point in bringing this up is that, does American political culture create giants anymore?
Not really. Not really. I think it is about Trump. I mean, I think that Trump towers over every other political figure today. So it's hard to see any point of comparison. And yeah, we'll have to obviously see what happens during his second term, to give a proper assessment of him. Anyway,
well, why don't we do this? Because I've seen a lot of interesting comments. I've seen a lot of strange comments, but I suppose that's par for the course. We're entering 2025, George. How do you feel?
I'm basically a pessimist, and I don't think it's going to go well. I mean, that would be my
pessimist broadcast.
Yeah, exactly. I'm the sort of the Malays in the Malays group. But anyway, let's take a look at some of the comments on locals. And our good friend Cynthia, thank you very much, Cynthia, as always, for your generosity. Really appreciate it. So Cynthia says, I know there's no longer any rules of war anymore, but there ought to be at least a rule which involves accurate reporting of casualties in war. Yeah, but apparently no such rule exists. Otherwise, no one would have any doubt as to how many have died so far in the Ukraine war, which undoubtedly would result in NATO cutting all support for this war, or at least if the Ukrainian casualty numbers far exceeded that of the Russians. After all, it's only natural to cut your losses before you lose everything. I don't know. It's a very good point. But the issue with the casualties is that it only matters if the casualties are your own. I don't think NATO really cares very much about the Ukrainian casualty numbers. I mean, they know about it. They're very much aware of it, but they don't really care. And even if you told the public, well, listen, these are the casualty numbers, they don't really care. I mean, it's only if suddenly NATO countries' citizens started dying, then they would suddenly wake up. But as long as it's Ukrainians dying, as long as it's Russians dying, they say, hey, have at it. Just don't inflict any pain on us.
Yeah, I mean, where did Ukraine or Ukrainians stand in the European mind in January of 2021? Probably wasn't much on the radar. Okay,
right.
I mean, these casualties are an abstraction for people. Okay.
Yeah.
But that shows how pathetic that this policy is that it's not about values at all, is it? It's not about the value of human life.
No.
The sanctity of ideas. No. I mean, this is, I mean, at the end of the day, most wars are just criminal endeavors.
Right. That's right. Anyway, Cynthia goes on. If we know exactly how many people died in the 9/11 attacks, there's no reason in the world why we don't know the same about Ukrainian war. Plus, if we did know that, Zelensky couldn't have got away with grossly underestimated Ukrainian deaths while grossly overestimated Russian deaths, which alas is causing the entire West to wrongly believe that Ukraine is beating the Russians. But because he can get away with such lies, the war goes on unnecessarily and perhaps indefinitely. Well, I think that the reason is that no one's really asking any question. No one's really making. I mean, there are those who are providing estimates. We don't know how accurate, but they are providing some estimates of the casualties on both sides. But there's an absolutely de rigueur determination on the part of the politicians in the West, the media in the West, not to go into this question at any great detail. Just say, we'll just assume that the Russians are suffering huge casualties, and then we can be happy about that. So they throw around wild numbers, but then you say, well, okay, well, if you think that's how many casualties the Russians have suffered, well, how many casualties do you think Ukrainians have suffered? Well, they suddenly, they quickly lose interest in the subject. So I think nobody really wants to go there because essentially they want to keep the war going. Don't you want Ukraine to win? As the reporter said, don't you want Ukrainians to win? Say, we got to keep it going. So I think it's a deliberate attempt not to get into the question of the casualty numbers.
Well, the more the casualties are, there'll be less of a country called Ukraine that could even possibly win. It's just ridiculous.
No, yeah, that's right. And then Stone River, also, thank you so much. Stone River, really appreciate your generosity, says. And Stone River says, a less noticed but equally prescient snippet from Eisenhower's January 1961 valedictory speech, and he quotes here, the prospect of domination of the nation's scholars by federal employment, project allocations, and the power of money is ever present and is gravely to be regarded. Yes, no, you're right. That isn't mentioned. It was quite a remarkable speech. It's almost sort of inconceivable for any kind of leading politicians to go into the details in which Eisenhower went into about the military-industrial complex, about the innate bond between the contractors and the Pentagon, and as you say, about the federal government and the universities and so on. He went into it, and again, he had impeccable credentials. He was a five-star general. He was Supreme Allied Commander of NATO. He'd led the Allied armies on detail. He had the right to say it, but no, I don't know too many political figures who would go down that route.
And it's very interesting too, because that speech has only really gotten broad currency over the last 10, 15 years. Yes. Because when I was at university and I took a course in national security or studies or whatever it was, and there was a speech, what was it, NSC 48, all of the great national security documents, and we came across that one. I don't remember one of my professors saying, we really should take a close look at this here. It was just one of many. And only over the last 10 or 15 years, it's gone back to over and over and over again. It shows how prescient he was. And when Eisenhower was leaving, I mean, he'd been there for 8 years. He'd had a couple of heart attacks. At the time, he was kind of this, kind of like a night watchman president. He wasn't very, it was all not true. None of it was true. He was actually a very active president. Probably why he had his heart attacks. Okay. Right. But there was this myth here. Grandpa, this kind of elderly type person. And then of course, Jack Kennedy, Bing, splash, Camelot and all that. But that speech is just utterly remarkable, just like the John F. Kennedy speech at the American University months before he was killed. Again, that speech is far wide currency, far further currency than ever did at the time.
But that's it, and you have to keep in mind that Eisenhower was really kind of annoyed by what Kennedy had done. I mean, Kennedy in that 1960 campaign had said, "Hey, the country's has fallen fast asleep. We're falling behind the Soviet Union. We're losing the Cold War," and all
The
of this
missile gap.
annoyed Eisenhower because he knew this is complete rubbish. And I think that again that kind of annoyed him so much, and I think that helped fuel as to why he gave that speech, because the whole idea that we're going to have a huge arms buildup because we're so far behind. He knew that this is a con. We're not far behind, and in any case, what is the point of having this huge nuclear arsenal? What are you going to do with it? And I think and I think he kind of appreciated that just simply building up a giant nuclear arsenal doesn't actually do anything to enhance your security, because you're not going to use nuclear weapons. So what are you going to? Why do you need this massive arsenal? So he was actually seriously thinking about these issues, which I don't think the Kennedy people really were. They just wanted to attack Eisenhower on really stupid grounds.
Well, and we know now, because of memoirs and documents that have been released, that JFK was very, very sensitive to the criticism that Eisenhower. We mentioned this in the very beginning of our podcast, that presidents were very, very careful in what they said. But there were times when Eisenhower was interviewed, he would kind of mildly, without mentioning the name and all. But I mean, JFK and his people knew he's talking about you. Okay,
Right.
Very mild and very statesman-like, okay, unlike it is today. But
that's right. That's exactly right. So in fact, and Kennedy really was a disastrous presidency in many ways, because we got to the country's got to start moving. We got to get it moving again. We got to win the Cold War. We're losing, and so on, and that helped escalate American involvement in Vietnam, which again Eisenhower had been very shrewdly kind of kept American involvement to a minimum. It was involved, but in the minimum. But instead, Kennedy escalated it, and then of course the massive arms buildup again cost huge amounts of money. Helped fuel the inflation down the road. But again, Eisenhower said, "We don't really need to do this. We're already comfortably ahead. And what's the point of having more missiles?" Anyway, I think. I think in retrospect, I think the Eisenhower presidency, looks pretty good.
Yeah. Okay. Well, when you got Joe Biden, people like Joe Biden in the same category, it suddenly elevates you, doesn't it? Eisenhower just went up one spot, just Biden's very existence. He just went. I think the Biden presidency is going to be remembered as a disaster, like so many people, rightly or wrongly. I don't want to hash this out here and now. Like the Carter administration, I think that it's going to be Joe Biden is just going to be thrashed.
I think so. Yeah, I think so too. Anyway, Peter, I think our time is up. I think we've done a good long live stream. Good. We're getting the man himself, the one the one who's doing all the work. Yeah, I'm the one who's doing all the damn work. Everyone else is just a freeloader. So to everyone who joined us, to all Gagglers, we wish all the best for 2025. However pessimistic we may be, we wish everybody a very happy new year. I hope this year brings at least as much joy as possible in their lives. So thank you everybody for all of your contributions to the Gaggle, and we hope to make with even better and an even more worthwhile year in 2025.
You have no doubt that there'll be plenty to talk about. Okay,
there's going to be plenty to talk about. There's lots that's going to happen. So thank you, everybody. See you next year, next Monday, 10 a.m. Yeah, 10 a.m. Eastern time. Thank you. Happy New Year. Goodbye.